beautiful people. Thank you for joining us today. We are without Marcos Melitzis because he is on vacation. More power to him. Hope he's having a good time. But instead, we've got a special guest today. One of my favorites, my favorite pollster, nationally, of course, probably worldwide because I don't know any other pollsters worldwide. So on the whole globe, and that is Drew. Drew, say hi.
Hello. Thanks for having me on the show.
Drew Linzer. He is the director of, or tell me, here I am. I'm mildly unprepared, but that's okay. We're going to have a great time. What's your exact title? I always just think of him as director of polling. Director of polling at Civics.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's Civics with a Q. It's CIVIQS. And we do this monthly co-branded poll with Daily Kos, and Civics conducts it for us. And sometimes we kind of work on the questions together. Sometimes they come up with questions entirely by themselves. Sometimes we suggest a subject matter, and then the real pollsters take over and figure out how to ask about it. But we have been doing some really interesting stuff lately. I think in our co-branded poll, I don't want to take too much credit for it. It's really Civics that comes up with how to attack these topics. We recently did one that we had Drew on a while back about that was specific on transgender issues. And I think we had some really interesting findings from that. And today we have a deep dive on abortion polling. And I think it's really interesting stuff, partly because Civics ask questions that I haven't seen anybody else ask. Partly because it's obvious that regardless of what Republicans might want, this is going to be a huge topic next year. I know we spent a lot of time listening to Republicans tell us last year that by November, when women wouldn't remember that they were second-class citizens and that they didn't have bodily autonomy. And guess what? They did remember, and they still remember. In fact, they probably remember even more. This is going to be interesting, informative. I think it will, perhaps it paints some ideas for how Democrats might move forward politically. We are coming off of, there was of course, a ruling by a federal judge in Texas that made the issue of abortion important all over again, and not just in Texas, but nationally, because this judge ruled that early medical abortion pills, medical abortion, could not be distributed, were banned. And he banned them nationwide, even though he's just a federal judge in Texas. And the Supreme Court put that ruling on hold while it goes through the appeals process. So that ruling is currently under appeal. But it I think brings home for people the fact that if you live in a blue state like I do in California, that has voted to protect abortion rights, that has put it in the Constitution, as voters did also in Michigan last cycle, as voters did in Vermont last cycle. It doesn't matter, because if you have some right-wing judge in the Fifth Circuit, which is a historically very conservative, extremist circuit, you just don't know what's going to end up affecting you. This is extremely common. The abortion pill, the early abortion pill, the medical abortion pill is an extremely common way for women to safely undergo early in their pregnancy, abort a fetus or abort a pregnancy. And it is it's very easy to administer. Women can mostly take it at home, take the pill at home in the comfort of their own home and the privacy. It's just it's frightening what's going on. in this country, to be honest. And I'm an optimist, so I think we can I think we can ultimately right this ship, but we have to be honest about where we are. And where we are is somewhere that was unimaginable just 2 years ago. Even amid Trump's presidency and how crazy off the hook it was, unhinged it was all the time, it was hard to imagine a patchwork system for abortion in our country. Something that I kind of got used to when the same-sex marriage bans were in place, that some states you could get married in and have that marriage recognized, and some you couldn't. Now, some states you can get an abortion in, and some states you can't. So that's where we are. And we are not just beholden to our state, but we're beholden to the most right-wing forces of the Republican Party, who there's what they wanna do. What Republicans want to do is have a nationwide abortion ban. It's that simple. So, in any case, I've had a lot to say. Drew's been here nodding along, and I wanna bring Drew into the conversation now about this poll. Drew, tell us a little bit about this poll, and how you sort of think about it, how it's organized in your mind in terms of some of the findings.
Yeah, sure. So, thanks again for having me on the show. And as you said, we worked together to come up with really a deep dive on the issue of abortion, access to abortion, reproductive rights more broadly, and people's values and preferences around the issue. We conducted a national survey of 1,159 registered voters and touched on what I would consider a few key themes. One, to start, is feelings about access to medical abortion, as you were just describing in the Supreme Court's recent decision. We had a series of questions about abortion rights and what laws should govern abortion. And then a third set of questions having to do with people's personal values and ways in which how people feel about abortion at a personal level may or may not actually overlap with what they think policy should be. So some really good findings on each of those in each of those groups. I should say there's actually a couple more things that maybe are a bit more of strategic political value. We can come back to those at the very end about whether
Oh,
people
no,
see
they won't come
themselves.
back at the very end. I may
Yeah.
pull those up at any
Okay.
moment, because to me, that's the juice right there, and I don't wanna deprive people. I don't wanna tease them until the very end.
Jeez.
I always have this conflict, right? Because I have, I studied, well, I've studied all kinds of stuff, print and documentary and whatever, and in broadcast, I had a broadcast professor who always wanted to take the documentary I was working on and take everything that was the juiciest part of it and put it in the first 2 minutes of the documentary. I was like,
All right. Well, we can start
"Okay,
there.
there's still 20 minutes to go." Uh,
I'll
so,
tell you what. Let's
yeah.
let's start. Let's start there.
You wanna front load?
Well, if what you care about is how abortion is playing politically,
Yeah.
let's just start there, and then we can get into the values and the opinions and policies and stuff. But we asked people just straight up, who do you think your opinion on abortion is closer to, Democrats or Republicans? And people said Democrats. The specific question was, do you think that your opinion on the issue of abortion is closer to Democrats or Republicans in your state? So nationwide, 49% of people said Democrats, 31% of people said Republicans. And interestingly, everyone else said either neither, so 16% neither Democrats nor Republicans, or 5% unsure. And right off the bat, that's an 18-point lead here in favor of Democrats. And when you break it down by party ID, it gets even more interesting, because Democrats almost unanimously say Democratic leaders are closer to them on the issue of abortion. Independent voters, by an almost 2-to-1 margin, also side with Democrats. So it's 45 to 24, seeing themselves as closer to Democratic leaders in their state. This is among independents. Now, among Republicans, you would expect that Republican voters say that they're closer to Republicans in their state. But in fact, only 67% of even Republican voters say that. 9% of Republican voters say that they're closer to Democrats in their state on abortion, and 16% of Republican voters say that they're closer to neither Democrats nor Republicans on the issue of abortion in their state. I mean, by
Wait, so
any
how many?
measure,
Will
this
you
is a
remind me?
winning issue for Democrats.
For Democrats, 67% say they are, of Republicans say they are in support or are close to the Republican position. Is that right?
Right, but a
Okay.
third of
A third
Republicans
don't.
don't.
Right. Right. So here's one from a political standpoint. Here's something that I've pointed out a couple times that I've been fixated on, just in terms of how this is playing politically. And then we can go back to some of these, some of these categories that you have sort of
Mhm.
separated out so that we can organize this in a fashion that people might be able to remember. But one thing I noticed was that we had this question about whether or not people were concerned that a federal court ruling or a federal law might
Mhm.
affect access to abortion in their state. Um, and uh, and what it came down to was that twice as many people were concerned about that and about it being restrictive, more
Mhm.
restrictive in their state, or making access to abortion more restrictive in their state. Twice as many people were concerned about that, 44%, than were concerned about a federal law or court ruling expanding access in their state. 22% were
That's right.
concerned about that. So when I think about that, then there was another 27% that said, no, I'm not concerned.
Right.
But that's only basically a quarter of the electorate. I mean, so you've got almost, and 7% were unsure, but you've got a good portion of the electorate that is concerned one way or the other, and much more concerned in favor of Democrats, right? The Democratic position, that it shouldn't be constricted more than it is. And I just want to make one more point about that, which is if you go into the crosstabs and look at them, the people who are concerned about a federal law or court decision restricting access in their state is particularly concerned people of color. In 60 percentile, you have Black people, Black voters, and Latino voters saying that they are concerned about that. In the 60th percentile, isn't that right, Drew? I think you're looking at it right now. I don't
I
remember
have
the
it up here.
exact.
If you're wondering
Yeah.
where my gaze is going.
No,
Yeah.
I know where it's going. So I'm wondering if you'll cite the exact
No,
number.
that's right.
Yeah.
62% of Black voters say they're concerned that a federal law or court decision will make abortion policy more restrictive in their state. 60% of Hispanic voters. Um, there is a real, not only opinion uh, preference for, I'm sorry, there's not only is there more of a concern among people that abortion will be restricted, but there is an intensity gap between Democrats and Republicans, and even independents, where Democrats are much more concerned about restrictions than Republicans are about perhaps some federal decision making abortion more accessible. Democrats, by a margin of 75-5, say that they're concerned about additional restrictions, with only 17% saying that they're not concerned. Independents, 45-19, concerned about some federal law causing more restrictions to be put into place in their state. Whereas 37% of Republicans say, I'm not concerned about what might happen at the federal level. So, again, this is something where Democrats are in alignment. They want um, abortion to be safe and accessible, and they think that the government should not be coming in, but they're worried that some federal decision may come in. And
Right.
I mean,
Specifically
again,
to restrict.
to restrict,
Specifically to
yeah.
restrict. Yeah.
And again, I mean, if we're talking about what this means politically, this is a very strong issue for Democrats, and issue that motivates Democrats because Democrats are worried.
Right. So, and some people will say, okay, well, sure. I mean, number one, it's motivating for two demographics that we definitely need to get out to the polls. Okay. We definitely need to vote for Democrats. I mean, and black voters have very historically done, had high turnout in presidential elections. And voted for Democrats in high numbers. It's the backbone. Black voters are the backbone of the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, and get sued for defamation. Um, um, but but Hispanic voters, Latino voters, that's a group of people that it sometimes doesn't turn out as as in as high propensity as we would like. And despite all the wringing of hands about whether or not Republicans are making a bigger inroads with Latino voters, they still vote largely for Democrats. Okay. Now, there's a difference. I mean, Latino voters are not all the same. There's a difference between the Cubans and the Venezuelans and the, people who come from Mexico. And, they cannot, it's not a monolithic group, but Democrats are still winning them by and large. So we want more of them to turn out, generally speaking. The other thing I just want to say, some people might say, okay, well, that's probably blue state Democrats that are worried about that. True. I mean, I'm worried about it, and I'm a blue state Democrat. I'm not sitting here thinking that California is going to restrict my access. But we need people in every region of this country, Democrats, to turn out. And I'll tell you why. It's partly the presidential in the swing states, but also, and then the Senate, of course. We've got some important Senate races where that will matter in Pennsylvania, in Montana, in Ohio, in in not North Carolina, in Wisconsin, but in Arizona. No, there's a gubernatorial in Arizona. Oh yeah, there's no Ruben Gallego in Arizona. Sorry, I'm doing this. I'm shooting from the hip. Anyway, in a lot of these swing states. But the other thing is that the Democrats lost the House probably because we sagged, our turnout sagged in some bluish districts in New York and also in California. Okay. If people are motivated to get to the polls because they don't care that they're in a blue state, they're animated by this issue, and they realize it's a threat, that is going to help Democrats retake the House. We can't afford to have anybody say, this isn't going to affect me. We need everybody to be thinking, yeah, this could affect me or someone I love, and get to the polls because of it. And so this is just one more motivator for people in a blue state who figure, oh, well, if it comes down to Biden and whoever else, I know Biden will win my state. They're going to want to go out and make a statement in their district. And that's helpful in terms of flipping the House, as well as motivating people to get more involved across the country in donating, in phone banking, in canvassing, things like that. So, all right. Anything to add on the political front there, Drew?
No.
No. Okay. So, Drew laid out these three categories. Let's talk about medical abortion, Drew. Tell us what you got there.
Okay, so right off the bat, we asked Americans whether they think that medical abortion pills should be legal or illegal in their state. And a majority of people said legal, just legal, period. 54%. We gave folks an option to respond legal under certain circumstances. That's legal, but it's a differently worded version of legal. And another 19% of people said that that's what they felt comfortable with. And then 19% said illegal. So just rounding it off here, it's about 75% legal to about 20% illegal. This is a huge majority of people who say that they want the abortion pill to be legal in their state. Obviously, almost every Democrat we spoke to said that. But interestingly, many Republicans also want this to be legal. Only 39% of Republicans said that they thought that the abortion pill and medical abortion should be illegal. Even a majority of Republicans want this to be legal. So that's not even close. This is something that there is a recognition that people want. So we followed that up by saying, well, what do you think about the Supreme Court decision that issued this ruling that preserved access to mifepristone, also known as the abortion pill? Do you support or oppose this decision? And as you'd expect, 62% say they support the decision to keep the access to the abortion pill. Only 25% oppose. And I mean, there's just a staggering difference in favor of maintaining access. And this 25% who we see saying they oppose it, this actually comes back up again in various places in the survey, that there's
I
really only about a 20 to 25% core of Americans who are really staunchly anti-abortion, no matter how they
I
describe themselves. When we give them specific ways to describe what their feelings are about their, their own values and what policies they want, it's really just fifth to a quarter tops of Americans who want these new, more severe restrictive policies that we're starting to see being pushed by Republican politicians. There's just
It's
not a
really
lot of
interesting.
support or demand for that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so we usually think about how much support is there in favor of something, right? But what came through in this poll that you're emphasizing and that I think is worth, cannot really be overstated enough, which is how little support there is for going the way that things are actually heading and the
Exactly.
way that Republican politicians want them to go, right? So it's not just that there's 60% in favor of legalization or 75% who want access to mifepristone or whatever.
Mhm.
It's that there's so little support going the other way. There's so
That's right.
little support for all out bans or for not having access. It's really, I mean, I just I I keep talking about the Republican strategy being the 50 minus strategy. In this case, like, because you normally are trying to build to 50 plus 1 in order to win an election, right? In this case, it's 50 minus 25. Like, it's their 50 minus 25 strategy. They're appealing to 25% of the electorate, essentially, with their really drive to get a national abortion ban.
Yeah, in fact, we asked people, this is a very common way that pollsters ask a question about abortion, but we asked people, do you think abortion should be legal in all cases, legal in most cases, illegal in most cases, or illegal in all cases? And only 8% said illegal in all cases. And in fact, only 14% of Republicans said illegal in all cases. So even Republicans, by and large, who would prefer to make abortion more illegal, are not saying that it should be 100% illegal. They want exceptions. 57% of Republicans say illegal in most cases. 20% of Republicans say legal in most cases. And then there's some Republicans, 3%, who say legal in all cases. So it's a very small constituency for making abortion illegal.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want to, should we talk about, have we already talked about abortion policy and the government's role? Did we kind of get into that in the beginning when we talked about the politics of this, or do you have anything you want to add on that front?
Yeah, sometimes when we do these surveys, we take that initial question and we kind of probe it and say, well, what about if you consider this possibility? What about this possibility? And one of the things that we asked about in this survey, because we were able to ask some more detailed questions, was what about doctors who facilitate abortions? What about women who are faced with choices about their pregnancy and abortion? Should they face legal consequences? Should they be exposed to the risk of legal consequences? So let me just give you the wording here so you can hear what you say. So which comes closer to your point of view? A, Doctors should be able to perform abortions without fear of consequences, or B, doctors who perform abortions should face legal consequences, because these are policies that are being put on the table. And 62% of people say doctors should be able to perform abortions without fear of consequences. Only 26% are supportive of this idea that doctors should face legal consequences. So there again, there's that 20 25%. What about women? Women should be able to make their own choices about abortion, or women who have abortions should face legal consequences. Um, 64% say women should be able to make their own choices without fear of legal consequences. Only 20% say that women who have abortions should face legal consequences. Now, you could say, well, that's even 20% is a very big number for this idea that women who and their pregnancies with abortion should face legal consequences, such as fines or imprisonment. Yes, 20% is a lot of people who believe that. On the other hand, that means that 80% of people don't believe that. And again, that's just an enormous uh, majority of support for this idea that doctors and women should not have to consider being fined or imprisoned for facilitating, performing, or having abortions.
And they are undoubtedly thinking about this. Doctors are thinking about this. Women are thinking about it. I know there was, I wish I could tell you who did this study, but recently there was a study done where they gave a script to women who pretended essentially that they were pregnant, and they were calling around, I think in Oklahoma, hospitals. What
Mhm.
would their options be if they, ended up having a pregnancy that went awry, or,
Mhm.
what would the doctors do? What would the hospital do? And there was this whole range of answers, because there's no longer there's no medical standard. Well, the medical standard is, this is what used to happen, right? What's the best medical standard that we can have that's most likely to, number one, save the life of the woman, and number two, save the life of the baby? And this is what the scenario was, is that they wanted the baby, but there was something horribly wrong with it, or something
Okay.
went horribly wrong amid the birth, right? So, and just the idea that there is a medical standard of practice, but it's not being put into use in most of these places anymore, in most of these red states, because especially red states that have any sort of abortion restrictions or ban or penalties or whatever, all of the practitioners in those areas are working overtime, not to obviously end up in jail or get sued out of being, in practice or whatever. And that means that they're not working for the best medical outcomes of their patients. It means that they are working to avoid getting punished, understandably, by the state. I mean,
Mhm.
the state is giving these doctors and nurses, these medical practitioners, impossible choices. And we're starting to see now, there's reports that there's fewer OBGYN residencies being done in some of these states that have some of the newest, harshest bans. I mean, if they figure who, if someone's going to get trained as an OBGYN, you're
Right.
not going to want to go to one of these states, right? So they're going to have fewer, there's going to be this incredible amount of brain drain in these red states that have done, horrible things to doctors and nurses and medical practitioners there, who are simply trying to do the best they can under impossible circumstances.
And look, you see the results of a survey like this. Voters recognize this. They don't want this. They do not want doctors to be put in that position, and they especially don't want women to be put in that position.
Yeah. So, and then you have the personal. Oh, just something I thought of too. I thought of something. You may say, I cannot imagine a situation in which women would be penalized for getting an abortion, seeking an abortion, whatever. Well, I don't know if you guys remember, but in 2016, Donald Trump was asked that direct question, I think by Chris Matthews. And he said, yeah, there'll probably have to be a penalty at some point. They'll have to be penalized at some point. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but it was clear that he was talking about potentially punishing women. And this was in 2016. This was in his first run. It wasn't in 2020. Now I think he's a little afraid of this issue. He's a little afraid that it could backfire if he overemphasizes it, since he packed the court with a bunch of right-wing judges who struck down abortion rights as soon as they had at the very first opportunity they had. It's just like, yep, we're headed straight for that that bomb right at the beginning. So anyway, all right. And then the third category you mentioned was personal effects.
Yeah, values.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, values. Let's talk about values.
Well,
because no, I do want to say that when Joe Biden launched his reelection campaign, he did so with a values-based video that emphasized freedoms, that emphasized reproductive freedoms to all kinds of things, like reproductive freedom, like bodily autonomy, like voting rights, freedom to cast your ballot and have it be counted. The freedom to seek medical care and get the medical care that you think is best for you. The freedom to be safe from fear of being gunned down in broad daylight, because our whole country's been overridden with a bunch of, assault weapon style guns. So freedom and the values-based argument was the one that he made and he launched his reelection with. So I think it's perfectly appropriate that we are going to look at what the values are here on abortion. So with that in mind, Drew?
Yeah, so much of the debate around abortion, at least in public opinion, comes down to these labels that we hear all the time. Are you pro-choice or are you pro-life? And those labels do not really capture, I think, accurately and specifically what people really feel, or what they would feel if they were put in a position of having to confront a decision about ending a pregnancy themselves. We did ask in this survey how people describe themselves. Do they describe themselves as pro-choice or pro-life? But we also gave them the option to say both, or something else. So on this question, just as a first measurement, 45% of people said that they describe themselves as pro-choice, 33% pro-life. So that's a net of 12 towards pro-choice, again, highlighting that this is a good issue politically for Democrats. But 14% said that they consider themselves both pro-choice and pro-life. And so what does that really mean? I think that makes sense to some of us, that these labels aren't exactly capturing what people want or what they believe. And they say, yes, you can be both pro-choice and pro-life, depending on your interpretation. But let's get a little bit more specific here. And here's a scenario. We asked folks, well, okay, think about this. If a friend or loved one was choosing to have an abortion and came to you for support, how would you react? Would you, number one, I would support them without question. Two, I would make sure they considered other options, but would ultimately support their decision. Or three, I would strongly oppose their decision and could not support it. And the number of people in that third category who simply say, I could not support it, it's only 21%. It is, again, that very small core of people. And look at the other two options. 37% of people say, I will support them without question. 38% said, I would make sure they considered other options, but I would support their decision. So at a personal values and experience level, people understand that this is a choice that women should be able to make, that whether it's their friend or their loved one, that counsel them however you like with whatever your values are, but ultimately this is a decision that they should be able to make. Uh, there's one more question I want to describe here for you. We asked folks, well, which of these following statements come closer to review? Number one,
I love this question, by the way. I love this
this next one
question.
here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it captures the same idea. What's closest to your point of view? Number one, I personally support a woman's right to an abortion and believe it should be legal and available. But number two, I'm personally against abortion, but I do not believe government should prevent a woman from making that decision for herself. Finally, number three, I personally believe having an abortion is wrong and should be illegal. So the percent of people who pick that third most restrictive category is just 26%. That's a quarter of the country picks it. You can say, well, that's a lot. A quarter of people would prefer making abortion illegal and they believe it's wrong. But the other way to look at it is 42% of people just come out and say, I support the right to abortion, period. This middle category is very interesting. I'm personally against abortion, but I don't think government should prevent a woman from making that decision for herself. That's 27% of the country right there. These are people who recognize that what they believe personally does not belong as government policy, that they can hold a personal belief that abortion is something that they are against, and at the same time recognize that government should not be putting laws in place that take those decisions away and those rights away from women. So it's
Right.
really something to see just broken out in a survey like this, that there isn't this Democrats support abortion, Republicans oppose it, polarization and dichotomy in public opinion. There is a very strong core of support among Democrats for keeping abortion available and safe and legal. And then among Republicans, there is a divide where, yes, some say abortion is wrong. They don't support it. They think it should be illegal. But at the same time, there are many Republicans and many, many independents who recognize that maybe this isn't something that they are personally comfortable with, but it shouldn't be going into government policy. And I think that it's really important that Democratic leaders understand that this is an issue that they have a mandate on and support from the public in large numbers to keep abortion legal, to keep it safe, to keep it available. This is what people want. That's the policy they want.
Right. This is one of the reasons that I like this question so much is that I think there was an assumption that if you were pro-life, if people identified themselves as pro-life, that meant that they wanted to ban abortion.
That's right.
Okay. And that was a mistake that in the wake of the Dobbs ruling, which by the Supreme Court last year, which struck down the constitutional right to an abortion, people kind of lumped all the pro-lifers together and they were like, okay, so the pro-lifers are anti-abortion, right? They're going to want bans. It's the Republican position. Right. And then the pro-choicers are Democrats. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's true. The pro-choicers are Democrats. Where they were wrong is that all the pro-lifers were supported the Republican position. They may have been Republicans, but they didn't necessarily support the Republican position, which again is to have a national abortion ban. Now, they might debate for a little while whether they want that ban to be, 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 15 weeks. But their goal is, I can assure you, to get it down to where it's virtually nothing. Okay. If they can get away with it, they will do it. And I'll tell you why we know that in a second. So this category, I'm personally against abortion, but it should be legal. That 27% of people are probably people who identify as pro-life personally, but don't want the government to be making decisions for others based on that.
It's a third of Republicans. A third of Republicans say, yes, personally, I oppose abortion, but it should be legal. And incidentally, 7% of Republicans say that I support the right to an abortion.
Right.
So again, on this measure, it's just barely a half of Republicans who say abortion should be illegal. So there are a large number of people in this country, conservatives, who may describe themselves as pro-life, but do not want policies put in place that take away access to abortion. Those two things are not synonymous, and it's really important for us to recognize that.
Right. It's really important. And again, people might say, well, if they're Republicans, who cares? They're going to vote for the Republican.
No,
Maybe not.
no.
I mean, this is exactly the type of issue that's so important to people, where they feel like their basic freedoms, their basic bodily autonomy, or their child's basic bodily autonomy is under attack. That the government could decide how to steer their child's future. They had an abortion when they were younger. They took the medical abortion pill, whatever. And then they knew that because of that, they were able to go to school, or they were able to actually, find a partner that was a good partner for them, where they could, raise a family together and provide a supportive environment, whatever it is. These are important, passionate, values-based policies. And these are exactly the type of things where, the MAGA Republicans, the people who are just essentially super into Trumpism or super into Trump, and they're virtually cultists at this point. This is not going to make them think twice, right? They're We're off the polling.
We don't have that in the poll, but go ahead. I'll set aside for
Drew, what about the question where you asked about the cultists and what they think? No, okay.
We'll save that for next month.
Yes. To preserve Drew's reputation, I am off on my own jag now. This is the Carrie Elavelle jag, right? But the MAGA Republicans they're not going to vote on abortion. They're just going to vote on, who has the R behind their name, who's the most Trumpist, Trumpian character. They are full believers at this point, MAGA Republicans, in Trumpism, regardless if that's DeSantis, they decide, or Trump, or someone else. They are full-fledged MAGA Republicans. But there is still this roughly, and I usually think of it as roughly 20 to 25%. And that proves true, or looks to be, based on this poll, that there's about 20 to 25% who I think of Republicans who maybe considered themselves old guard Republicans, establishment Republicans, reality-based Republicans. They're not super jazzed about, the Trump direction of this party. These are, and particularly women. I don't think you can underestimate people who have had children, who have faced, challenges with pregnancies, who in some cases very badly wanted a child and had to have a really unfortunate, intervention late in their pregnancy. People have life experience with this, and it is visceral for them. And this is the type of thing that can bring them to vote against someone, who is, like Doug Mastriano, who ran for governor in Pennsylvania and just totally did a face plant because he was a super MAGA Republican, had attended January 6th, the rally in Washington, the parade in Washington that turned into an insurrection, a violent insurrection. But also was very clear about wanting no exceptions for abortion, and a total abortion ban. And, he lost to his Democratic rival by double digits, didn't even come close in Pennsylvania, which is a swing state. So, there are people who will either not turn out in protest or might even cast a ballot for a Democrat if they think that the Republican candidate is just, so horribly wrong and intrusive on what is a personal decision for people that they just can't cast a ballot for them. And they will split tickets. This will split tickets, and this could work both ways. They might find that their local candidate is, more reasonable, and they're willing to vote for them, but they're not going to vote for whoever the national candidate is. Or they might reject both, or they might go the other way. They find the national candidate more palatable. I can't imagine, frankly, under which circumstances that would be given the way the Republican Party is going. But then don't find the local candidate palatable. And so all of these issues matter, these visceral values-based issues.
We found something very interesting along these lines that I do want to note. We took the Republican respondents and broke them out by age. So you were saying something about, age, generational effects, life experience. How does this affect how people think about the issues we've been discussing? So very interestingly, among Republicans, Republicans become more supportive of access to abortion as they get older. And so here's just one example of this. We took this question of access to mifepristone and whether this should be legal. So by age, the percent of Republicans who think that medical abortion should be legal, it starts off at 43% among young Republicans, so 18 to 34. Republicans 35 to 49, 49% think that medical abortion should be legal. 50 to 64, 51% think it should be legal. And among Republicans over age 65, that goes all the way up to 59% who think it should be legal. And I'll leave it to you or to the listeners to speculate as to why that may be. But empirically, it certainly seems to be the case that Republicans who are older, who perhaps have had more life experience, who have seen more things, are more understanding and about the issue of abortion and more open to certainly keeping medical abortion legal for that example, but there are other examples of it as well. So this is a wedge issue for Republicans that gets to experience, to personal values, to perspectives on how one's personal values should or should not be put into policy, and what one's personal values might mean for the choices that other people have to make. I mean, it's a very, very strong and compelling issue for Democrats, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah. And that's a great place to wrap up here. I'm just going to reframe Drew's phrasing just a little bit and say that it is a wedge issue that works in favor of Democrats. And some people remember a long time where they thought that wedge issues worked in favor exclusively of Republicans. That, the worm has turned on that, right? We are now in territory where regularly the social issues are wedge issues that work in favor of Democrats. That is mostly true on LGBTQ rights. It's true on abortion and in other areas as well, including immigration and other places. So great place to wrap up. I just want to thank Drew Linzer for joining me. He is the director of polling at Civics. That's Civics with a Q, CIVIQS. And they got all sorts of great stuff there that you can go. They've got a dashboard of things that you can go and poke around on if you go to civics.com, right?
Yeah, and in fact, if you're interested in more, the full report and the crosstabs from the survey we've been discussing are up on the site. If you go to civics.com/reports, you can see the report and the poll that we've been discussing in more detail. And if you go to the main page there and search for abortion, you can see the daily tracking that we've done on attitudes towards abortion going back to 2016. So we have years and years and years of polling on whether people think abortion should be legal or illegal. Go check that out as well.
Just out of curiosity, since the Dobbs ruling, has there been a rise in support for abortion, regardless of how much it is?
There has been a gradual increase in support for keeping abortion legal. Right now, we've got about 59% are responding they want legal, 37% illegal, grouping together those illegal in some and illegal in all cases folks. But since Dobbs, what we've seen is an increase in people who say that it should be that abortion should be legal in all cases, not just in most cases, but in all cases. So let's take the nuances out of this. It should just be legal.
We just want access. Just give us access. Let us make the decision in concert with our family and our doctors.
It's legal.
Okay. Thank you so much. Drew Linzer. Civics polling, and I am Carrie Eleveld. I think I neglected to say that. So if you listened this whole time and I didn't introduce myself, congratulations, you win a chocolate egg. No, not really. Sorry. But I do want to thank you for listening to us, for being involved, for being engaged. If you're listening to this podcast, you're obviously engaged. If you want something more granular that's focused really, really on the, nerdy numbers, and I say that with love of my heart, the nerdy data around elections, we have another podcast called The Down Ballot. Those guys, the people who do that are frankly, Marcos and I do sort of a 30,000 foot view here. We shoot from the hip. We banter back and forth. They do much more granular level, investigation of how things are playing in certain districts and which races are going to be interesting in the upcoming cycle. And come to our site, dailykos.com. Read us. If you've been listening but not reading, read us. You can comment in the comments section. It's very well moderated, so there aren't people just like totally beating up on each other with bullyish type tactics. It's another way to be involved, and we make elections. I don't, but the elections team actually figures out the progressive candidates that are likely to make a difference and support them, and you can donate there. As we get closer, the races start to define themselves a little bit. So there's all sorts of ways that you can get involved. Listen to our podcasts, come to dailykos.com, read up. If you're tired of the way the New York Times or the mainstream media, we are a fact-based site, but we're a lot more fun to read. Especially if you're a Democrat. If you're a Republican, maybe not so much. All right. Thanks so much. Take good care. Be safe, and we will see you next week here at The Brief, Daily Kos. Thank you.